The thing that I've always found difficult is when we have to give updates of bad news. We love celebrating the good news that we get to give our patients, but equally there's going to be cases where we don't have good news to give them. You're obviously you're searching through this fluid and you then get your fluid checked after. I remember thinking, each time one of my colleagues was next to me checking the fluid, I'd just be sat there thinking oh gosh, oh gosh. Then the training sessions are still a little bit limited. I remember when I was looking, it was quite daunting because a lot of the positions I was finding were for trained. I thought, oh, I don't know how to do any of these things. So I was mainly looking for things sort of like lab practitioner roles or specific trainee roles. I found that really nerve-wracking because I was thinking oh gosh, this is gone straight over my head. And I was really panicked thinking, what if they ask me a question and I don't know the answer?
Welcome everyone to the new episode of Let's Talk Embryology. Today we have Mary with us. She is a clinical embryologist at a fertility clinic in London. Welcome to the episode, Mary. How are you today?
Hello, Devesh. Thanks for having me today.
So today we are going to go in behind the scenes in the lab, what actually happens in the lab. And Mary is going to talk us through all the activities and the procedures happening inside the lab. So first of all, Mary, tell us what you do at the clinic.
Yeah, so I'm an embryologist at the clinic that I'm based in London, and I have been there since 2019. So when I first joined, I didn't have any embryology training. I'd finished university, I'd gone and travelled a bit, and then so joining the clinic was my first sort of step into how does an IVF unit run. So it was really interesting, a little bit scary because honestly didn't really know how to do anything, and it was a bit oh gosh, I've got so much to learn. But it's been amazing. And sort of fast forward to now, I'm still at the same clinic, and I completed the STP and I finished it last year in September. So
Oh, nice. Well,
yeah,
congratulations on that. And you're
thank
now
you.
now an official clinical embryologist after STP.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. What made you choose embryology or IVF as your career, apart from other clinical science careers?
Yeah, because I remember when I was at university and also in secondary school doing A levels, I always had a fascination for science, particularly biology. I remember being interested in things sort of like inherited diseases and genetics. And I remember at some stage they also go on to how they can maybe impact fertility. And I think that was one of sort of the first times I thought, oh, that's made me, look up and pay more attention. And I remember when I was at university, there was a module that we did, and it was a lot of it focused on more of that theme, but also the world of IVF and how patients could go there to potentially have treatment for known genetic diseases. And I remember being really fascinated by that, thinking, wow, this is amazing. Because I'd heard of IVF, but I hadn't really known anyone that had maybe had any treatment. And it was still, it's not new, but it was still quite new for science, it's not been out there as much as all of the other sort of disciplines that are there. I remember being really fascinated. And when I finished my undergraduate, I went on to do a master's that was specifically in reproductive medicine, and that focused a lot more into what happens in an IVF clinic, but also how do patients get there and what are the treatments available, and also like the regulatory requirements. So that was sort of that fed in quite nicely. And then I ended up at a clinic shortly after, and now I'm doing it, which is amazing. So
Mm,
yeah.
nice, nice. You're doing exactly what you wanted. That's excellent. Was it difficult getting into embryology, or was there a straightforward path that you could follow? Do this degree, then after undergraduate, do masters in this course, and then you get the job. Was it that straightforward, or was it tricky to find your way in?
Yeah, it was a little bit sort of it's obviously like very competitive because I know there's a a big increase in people wanting to go into the field, and as more treatment happens there will see more embryologists about, but then the training positions are still a little bit limited. So I remember when I was looking, it was quite daunting because a lot of the positions I was finding were for trained embryologists already. And I thought, oh, well, I don't know how to do any of these things. So I was mainly looking for things sort of like lab practitioner roles or specific trainee roles. I had also applied for the SCP in my master's as well, because that is sort of like almost a guaranteed pathway into it, and it's got the structured training run by health higher education England. So that was a sort of a more guaranteed step into it. And then I didn't end up doing the SCP. I managed to then get a job as a sort of lab practitioner at my clinic. And yeah, and I guess I just learned from there. So yeah, so I guess it was not a little bit difficult, but I think overall it went to plan. Like it didn't take too long. Um, so yeah.
Nice, nice. What was your undergraduate in?
So I did biomedical sciences. And yeah, then I followed on to do reproductive medicine as the master's.
Right. A lot of students, especially who are in college or maybe right in the school who want to get into this field, think
Mhm.
that you have to do specific reproductive science course in your undergraduate and your master's, whereas you have done biomedical, which is not exactly reproductive science. So for those students who want to get into embryology, do you think they need to do the exact reproductive science course, or can any biology undergraduate degree work? And then you can maybe specialize in your master's in the reproductive
Oh
science.
yeah, of course, yeah. So unless the requirements had changed, when I last looked, generally to get onto courses such as the scientist training program in embryology, there isn't a specific degree that they require. It will just be a relevant degree, and that generally tends to fall into a biology-based degree. Obviously, it can change every year, but as far as I'm aware, there wasn't a specific requirement that you had to have done a reproductive or embryology masters. It was just a relevant science degree, and they had a list of what could be accepted. So when I joined, which was when I started in 2022 for that intake, it was biomedical science would have been fine, biochemistry would have been fine. So there was a big list, and you didn't have to do a master's as long as you had been awarded with a 2-1. You could apply with a relevant degree. If you had a 2-2, the requirement was a master's, and again, the masters would have been in a relevant discipline, and there would have been a list of what they would have deemed as acceptable. But again, they may change with each year with the intake. So I'd always look on the school website, and they will always have like all the requirements that are needed. And if you're not sure, you can always contact them and just say this is what I have, and they can clarify if that's okay for them to accept. So
Right, right, makes sense. Yeah. So coming back to your training in the lab when you started as a lab technician, what was the first thing that you trained on, and how was that experience?
so I had to wait for my occupational health to come through because there's obviously requirements for keeping you safe at work. So I wasn't able to do any sort of lab based work until that happened. So I actually did a lot of paperwork. So sort of learning and like reading like the SOPs, and I'd be looking at all the HFEA consent forms. I'd be looking at patient files, and I'd be setting up the notes, checking, screenings, what was the treatment plan, just making sure that everything was essentially like in place before the patients would be coming through for their treatments the following day. I also was learning how to do like we use, for example, a platform, and that's our patient database. It's also how we report all of our data to the HFBA. So that would also include outcomes or the lab entries. So I was doing that for quite a few months, and that was really actually interesting because I got a lot out of it than what I thought I was going to get. At first, I thought, oh, I really want to get into the lab. I just want to get hands on. But this was really important because it gave you a rough idea of, oh, I understand what actually happens on day one treatment. Oh, this is what they do on day three. So it kind of gave a good background as to this is what will happen, in real life when I eventually get to go in. And then once all of once the occupational health was all fine, I actually started learning dish setup. That was my first thing that I trained on. And shortly after that, andrology. So dish setup again. Um, you think it's not a big deal when you first go in. You're like, oh, I'm just labeling dishes and filling them, but it's probably one of the most important things in the lab because essentially you're in charge of making sure you've got a good culture system to start with. We want to make sure that all of our gametes, embryos are in the best environment that they can. And that does start with the culture media and making sure that it's all done correctly. So that was a lot of, I remember thinking, oh gosh, okay, I need to make the list based on how many tubes of this do I need? How many tubes of that do I need? Do I need spares? Like at first it was quite daunting, but everyone was like super supportive. I remember I'd always make my list, compare it to somebody else. And that was one of the first things I learned after the paperwork. And then shortly after, I moved into andrology and I started to learn how we would do sort of, semen analysis, so SFAs. Um, Once I was signed off on doing those proficiently, I got to move on to doing patient preps. So this would be like parent samples for IVF or for ICSI and also IUI. And then again, there isn't sort of a set number of procedures that you do. It's a case of, how are you, do you feel like you're ready? Are you happy that you're, like the SAP is being followed and then you get your sign off and then you move on to the next step, which would be more difficult samples. So, for example, frozen samples or samples which weren't ejaculated, say they could have been retrieved from, say, like micro-TB, and then I guess the last thing in andrology that and stem freezing as well. And then I think one of the last things I learned was actually speaking to patients. I remember finding that bit really like, wow, like, okay, I'm actually going to get to put some, faces to these names that I'm seeing. And also, the witnessing requirements for when we're sending patients to produce and giving them the news after we had, this is how many eggs we've got, this is the sperm quality, this is what we're going to do, and just sort of guiding them through what they should expect from updates from the lab and the treatment going forward. And I remember that bit I found that really nerve wracking because I didn't know as much clinical embryology that you learn at university, but
Right.
then when you're faced in that position with the patients, I was thinking like, oh gosh, this is like gone straight over my head. And I was really panicked thinking, what if they ask me a question and I don't know the answer? I remember like all my colleagues and seniors that were training me, they said, it's okay if you don't know an answer, like that's fine. And I remember thinking, yes, it is fine not to know an answer. I can find out for them. But I remember feeling like so like pressured to like know everything because I guess I always wanted to, like, yes, I can answer that. And that was something which I had to learn to. It's okay, basically, it's okay if you don't know the answer, especially when you're training, and you can go and find out and then let them know. So yeah,
Right. You'll always get a second opportunity or maybe third to answer their questions later on. But I
yeah.
agree, at the time you feel a bit of pressure. I don't know the answer. What can I say right now? And they would expect an answer for me. That makes sense. Yeah. What else are you doing at the lab currently? What procedures are you doing independently? Signed off on.
Oh yeah. So I am doing egg collections, fertilization checks, freezing, pouring, did I say embryo transfers? Yeah, embryo
Yeah.
transfers, embryo grading, patient calls update. I moved on to I'm doing clinical ICSI cases and I'm at the stage now where I feel like I'm ready to just go for it. Like at the moment, I was splitting them, checking that, my results were what should be expected, and they've been on track for the last few times I've been doing it. So I feel like I'm ready now to just sort of just go for it. So that is where I'm at. I'm also wanting to become a training officer myself,
Oh wow.
so I can support the next round of
Uh-huh.
STPs. I figured it'd be nice to give back to them and also provide a supportive role. I was also one of the, in fact, I guess the only one, no, the first one in my clinic to start the new curriculum that came out in 2022. So I thought, okay, I've done it. What can I do to help support everybody else that's going through it? So yeah, that's what I'm currently working on to do a webinar and then get a certificate afterwards. And yeah, hopefully I'll be a training officer
Right.
for our next wave of SCPs that start soon. So
Right. Sounds like a busy day for you because you
yeah.
do so many of the procedures in the lab. Was there any procedure that you found challenging to train on, or which took the most of your time, or which was really difficult to completely get signed off on?
Think everybody finds a collections are maybe one of the most sort
Yeah.
of not difficult because it's more like you never you obviously like you're searching through the fluid and you then get your fluid checked after and there was a number you have to do and then you'd get your sign off and I remember thinking each time one of my colleagues was next to me checking the fluid, I'd just be sat there thinking like, oh gosh, like, what if I, what have I done, what if I, missed an egg or something? Because, it can happen when you're training. So I remember finding that quite nerve wracking. So it was more just, yeah, just maybe like I get quite paranoid, like the self doubt would come in. But no, I think that was so maybe not one of the hardest, but I think that was one of like the most nerve wracking ones. And also maybe embryo transfers because in a lot of the other procedures, like someone can be right next to you and they can jump in quite easily. But when it came to embryo transfers, there's a point in it where you just have to do it and proceed. And if anything was to happen, someone would be there to help you. But there's like a very small specific moment where it's going to be quite difficult for them to come in. Like you just have to do it, like go for it. And yeah, it's more sort of trusting yourself because you practice so many
Right.
times. And
Right.
when you're practicing, you don't feel nervous because you build up the skills. You build up, what do I do? What do I do in this situation? What would I do if this was to happen? But when it comes down to doing it for real, that's where something out of nowhere you're so like nervous and you're like, oh gosh, like why do I feel so like tense right now? But I think that's pretty normal because obviously with the nature of the work that we're doing, it's very sensitive work. So it's obviously just knowing that, you want to always like help the patient. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't do embryo transfers myself, but I can relate to the feeling because while
yeah.
doing embryo transfers, you are at the final point of the
Yeah.
journey, almost there. The embryo has survived all the hurdles in between all the days. And then what if something happens then? So it's should be a very nerve-wracking situation to be in. Yeah, I agree. So you said you're currently training on ICSI, right?
Mhm.
How is that going for you?
Yeah, it's going okay. I've had some really good results recently. So that's, again, I guess when you're doing it, it's more, sometimes I doubt myself if I'm like, oh, did that one go well? And you're then anxiously waiting the next day to see what the fertilization result is. But it's gone fine. I think when it came to ICSI, it's not just the actual procedure itself, it's learning how to use the big micro manipulator. And there's many things that sort of work independently from each other, but they all need to then be working together for you to do the procedure. So the actual ICSI itself, once you learn all the other bits, like that bit's fine. It's all the bits around it, which I found hardest to learn. So like, oh, this isn't in focus, but then, this arm isn't in focus. But yeah, so that was probably a bit more challenging, but that's going really well at the moment.
Nice. So another thing I wanted to know is, so you do so many procedures in the lab on day-to-day
Mhm.
basis. Is there a favorite procedure? And is there a procedure that you hate doing absolutely? And why for both of them?
Um, oh, that's a bit of a hard question because I'd probably say it would just depend on the clinical workload, I'd say. Like I like all the procedures that we do, and it's really nice that we get to rotate around. And I would say, yeah, out of all the procedures, I like all of them. But the thing that I've always sort of maybe like found difficult is when we have to give updates of bad news. I've always like considered myself quite sort of happy, smiley person. And obviously, we love celebrating the good news that we get to give our patients, but equally there's going to be cases where we don't have good news to give them. And this sometimes Mostly can be over the phone, but can also be in person. And I've always found that bit one of the hardest parts, because I always like worry that, oh, am I delivering this news in the best way I can to support them? And you'll find that there's not like a set way you can do it, because every patient's different. But the most important thing is to always, try and be as supportive as you can, and try and give it in the best way that's hopefully going to be the nicest way that they can receive it. So I think that's sort of the bits that I don't like. But I think most people would say they don't like to do that, that part. It's always really nice when you've got great news to give. Yeah, you know, giving bad news is always going to be like a difficult thing to do. So,
Right. Right. Does it affect you as well when you're giving bad news to patients?
yeah, I always feel like I'm very empathetic towards them. I think as I've progressed and built more confidence in doing it, I find it less sort of challenging, but the effect it has on you is still the same. Like you feel like sad, it's not a nice thing that you're having to tell them. And and you have to think, I'm the one that's giving it. Imagine being the patient that's receiving the news. So it's always good to be mindful and adapt and just be as supportive as you can. So,
Right. So for any couple who is listening to this podcast, this episode, who is currently in the middle of their IVF journey or who is wanting to start their fertility treatment, which days or which parts of the treatment would you say they can expect major updates along?
so yeah, of course. So, well, so egg collection day is obviously probably the starting point of it, where we can only sort of predict egg numbers based on follicle development, but we can never say for certain until we actually collect them. So I'd say that's probably a big step, because it's letting the patients know this is what we're starting with for your treatment. And then obviously fertilization is another key point, because that's when we can see, okay, well, how many of these eggs were we able to fertilize successfully and normally. So that's obviously a big hurdle for them as well. But I guess for a lot of patients, it's getting to the day 5, when we want to see, well, how many of your embryos made it to the blastocyst stage, and therefore also good quality, so they have good chances, of either implanting or stay suitable for freezing, to use in the future. So I say those are sort of the main key days, but I can imagine, any update is always going to be like something. It's always, every update is important, and each time we give patients updates, we want to always, give them, honest, want to be transparent, and um, a lot of the time, we'll get asked, oh, is that good? And you don't want to. There's a way to sort of give updates and information where you're not telling them everything will work out in a certain way, because we don't know. So it's more sort of just giving them reassurance, like, well, this is how things are progressing, but we do need to wait, and we just need to wait and see, and we'll let you know as soon as we can. So,
Right, right. Major updates, but still, like you said, you can only
yeah,
predict. You cannot tell for
exactly.
certain what's
Yeah,
going to
we can
happen in the
only
future.
yeah, we can only give them sort of
Yeah,
a rough estimate of what we might see, but it's, yes, we make sure that you're not giving them, promises of what will happen, because we don't know, what will ultimately. So
perfect. Right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this episode. This was only part one of the episode. Part two would be released in a couple of weeks. So keep on your notifications on for the part two. And Mary, thank you for your time today. We'll see
no
you
worries.
in the next part.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Bye, Mary.
Thank you. Bye.